In this episode, what we're going to do is take the existing objects that we've built before, the category info and video info objects, and replace them with the most recent objects we created, the production and episode objects. We'll also get into building an HTTP API that will connect to techpub.com to download the production API JSON that we parsed in the last episode. And then we'll also get introduced to the async task class, as well as showing loading dialogues to the end user to let them know that something's happening. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. We're going to start off with the emulator view. And you can see here from the emulator, when the application first starts up, what we're going to see here on the screen is that we have a application that's loaded up with some images here on the left and the header and a little bit of information here. We're going to change this view around a little bit here shortly, but first let's figure out how we can actually get that data into the new view here. So let's hop back over to the main activity. I'm going to go inside the com.techpub.player, and we're going to replace all of the category info objects and all of the video info objects inside of this activity here. So what we'll do is we'll come inside of here, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete this out of here. And immediately we're going to see a bunch of the little red icons here, as well as a bunch of the little red icons on the bottom left corner as well. See on the right hand side, as well as you see over here in the gutter. The icons on the right hand side will identify errors inside of the document, so you can click them and it will navigate in the editor to those locations, while the ones on the left are just within the current pane. So the left hand gutter are just for current pane, right hand is where you can navigate throughout. So we'll see a few places here where we set a few things up. So we're using categories inside of the onCreate. Let's come down here, we're using categories in the category adapter. We'll come back in here and fix that shortly. And we're using them inside of here to get the position, and so forth. Let's just go ahead and leave those there actually, and we'll just say we're going to take a list of production, and so we're going to call it productions. And again, we have some errors here. We can hit Command-Shift-O or Control-Shift-O to alleviate the problems there. And then what we want to do is we want to be able to get those productions from somewhere. So what we'll want to do is we're going to mock up. So we'll say we're going to get this from some type of API. We'd say productions equals something. Right now we'll just set it to null, just so I have to go get something here shortly. So get productions from API. Then let's come down into the category adapter, and we're going to change this from an array adapter of categories into an array adapter of production. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over a list of productions to show those productions on the screen. Going back to the emulator, each one of these is a production. So the coder to developer, concepts, Android, ASP.NET Ajax are all going to be a production. We're going to change this from categories here. We're going to change this to productions. Hit Control space there for that. And we see with productions here, and I'll just get the changes with productions, and now we see that we have some differences here. This is going to be the name of the label, so the name of the production. So we no longer have a method called getCategoryLabel, so we'll say we're going to get the title here of the production. This is going to be the image resource ID. This is going to change. Inside of the JSON that comes down from the TechPub API, we actually don't have an image for each production at this point in time. So we're going to remove this, and let's go remove that from the XML here shortly as well, as soon as we get to that point where we're loading it up. And then inside of here we have a get description, so that kind of fell right in place. And then if the description is null, we'll leave it null. So the same thing that we had there before. So now on the main page, we've replaced the production altogether. If we were to go to the episodes, the video list activity, we'd see here we have a bunch of category infos where we'd be looping over each category. Let's go and replace this with a production as well. This is the second page that you see. So if we click on coder to developer, this loads the video list activity, which we're working in now. So let's go ahead and get rid of the category. Let's put production here. Control-Shift-O or Command-Shift-O to automatically import the production. And then we're going to see that production is being pulled from a mock repository. Let's go ahead and get rid of that mock repository now. I'm just going to delete it. And then we'll give a bunch of other errors in here saying that it can't find that mock repository. That's completely fine. We'll set this to null, and I'm just going to say this is the production. And I'm just doing this to keep some placeholders in place to know exactly what I'm doing. Again, there's not going to be an image there, so I'm just going to delete these couple of lines here. So there's going to be no image on the view. So when we get to this location, there's not going to be a logo or an image for the production itself. This is on the video list. And then we're going to have the production here. So we're going to get the category name, which was the old title, but now we just have get title from the production. And the production here has a get description, so that one will kind of fall right into place. And now we have a video list adapter. This is going to be a little bit different. This one is actually going to be an episode. So each episode something happens. Let's go Command Shift O or Control Shift O, and then we're going to say production. And this one's going to be get episodes. So now we have a list of episodes that we can work with. Now each episode, each category has a get episodes. It's going to get the position of that, and then it's going to get the name of the episode, but we don't have a name of the episode. Each episode has a title as well. So we'll put the title there. We'll put production here. Change this to get episodes. And the description falls in place as well. Now what I'm going to do is we're going to come back over to the main activity. And on this main activity, we're going to rename this from the category adapter to the production. We're going to name this to the production adapter, and we can rename it by right-clicking on it, and we go to refactor, rename. Just backspace out of this, and we'll just type production adapter and enter. And now it renamed everything right directly in place. So we have our production adapter, we have everything pulling in line here. But the problem is our productions that we have created are now null. So what we need to do at this point in time is create a class that's going to handle our HTTP communication up to techpub.com so we can communicate with the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new package. And this package is going to be called com.techpub.http. So this is where we're going to put our HTTP stuff. Now I'm going to separate this into an interface and into a class, mainly because we're going to be using inversion of control container, RoboJuice in the next episode, and I want to kind of break these things apart so I can have the inversion of control container bind everything up for us. We won't be using it in this episode, but I'm just kind of setting us up for next time around. So I'm going to create an interface here. Again, the Java folks here might wince at why I'm using I in front of my interfaces. This is a throwback from .NET, and I just prefer to use I in front of interfaces. So we'll say I techpub API. Alright, now we have the interface. We're going to go ahead and create one method in here, and this method is going to return a list of productions. And this productions is going to get it from some unknown location, which we'll provide in a second. So we can import production here. We also see that we have a couple other errors at this point in time. We're going to throw a techpub API exception, and a legal state exception, or an IO exception. This is Java's way of saying this method can throw these possible exceptions here. Notice how techpub API exception does not occur. Let's go ahead and create a new package for this. It's com.techpub.exception. I'm going to add a new class in here. Techpub API. So this is the exception that I'm going to throw if for some reason something happens up at the techpub API level and I'm not sure what's going to happen. So we're going to have the exception be the base class here. Click finish. And then it's going to say that it needs a serial, since it's a serializable class, it needs to have a serial version ID. I'm just going to generate one here. And that's pretty much all I need to do at this point in time. And then we'll go back to the techpub API and Command Shift O, import the exception, and now we're good to go. So we have our interface here. Let's go back to our main activity. And in the main activity, I'm just going to have I techpub API, and I'm just going to call it API. I'm going to import that. And what I'm saying is the productions are going to come from the API itself. So the API is going to be built up. The API will be new techpub API. Now notice this techpub API doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and create it in the HTTP class. in the HTTP package, excuse me, TechPub API, and it's going to have an interface. And click Add TechPub API, finish. And so it looks like it's set up our method here for us already. So now we have the ability to go up and get our productions. So what we need to do here is go to techpub.com, productions.json. And what we need to do is download the JSON from this URL at this location. And then what we need to do is use the mapper we created in the last episode to create the list of productions. At that point in time, we can then consume it inside the main activity, parse it out, and show all of the episodes and productions in the application itself. So let's go ahead and write that code now. Okay, so now I've typed in all the code here for the API, and let's go ahead and walk through it here. So up top, what I have is a private member for the production list mapper that we created in the last episode. And then what I have here is a constructor that takes in the dependency for the mapper, and I just set it to the local mapper here. Next, we have the get productions call. Again, this throws a TechPub API, an illegal state exception, and an IO exception. These exceptions happen anytime you're communicating with any type of HTTP component, such as a socket exception, any type of state that's going on inside of the application that might get thrown, or an exception that we throw as a TechPub API exception. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to use a default HTTP client. This is built into the Android framework. It allows us to communicate with GET, POST, PUTs, deletes. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a HTTP GET, and we're just going to communicate directly out to HTTP /techpub.com/productions.json. And then what we have is an HTTP response. We're going to set it to null just so it's locally set. And then we're going to do a little try catch here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to execute the GET request from the HTTP client. So we're going to say HTTP client execute this GET request, and here's the response. If something happens in here, we're going to have a client protocol exception. We're going to say e.print stack trace. Now what this is going to do, it's actually going to print the stack trace to the actual emulator's DDMS window so we can see the stack trace. We're not going to bubble it up to the front end user yet. In the future episodes, we're going to capture these exceptions and bubble them up to the user in some type of dialogue to let them know that it looks like we couldn't connect because of a network problem, or it looks like we couldn't connect because the URL was incorrect, any of the various errors. Right now, we just want to print it to the DDMS window just for testing, just to get us up and running. The next thing that we'll do is from the response, we're going to get its status line. So the status line is going to return the status line of the response. And it has a status code. So this is going to be the 200 for OK, your 301s, your 404s, your 500s, anything in HTTP protocol. This is the status code that's going to be returned. So now here we can say if it's 200 OK, 201 created, if for any reason that happened to be a created call for any type of JSON, we'll say we're going to consider those as OK responses. And then what's going to happen is from the response, we're going to get the entity out of it, and the entity is the message of the response. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the content from the entity. And this is the stream that's part of the response. Now once we have the stream, which is this input stream here, this input stream object, this is a Java to IO input streams. So it's kind of the base class for all of the Java input streams. We're going to convert that input stream to a string. So now I've created a method here that will convert the input stream to a string, and we're just going to navigate to that. I hit F3 to do that. And it's just a static method that takes an input stream and throws an IO exception if it for some reason can't read the stream properly. We're going to take a string buffer, and then we're just going to loop through the stream here. This is just some kind of basic programming here where we're looping through a stream and appending each an individual character to the stream itself. And we're creating a string buffer, so we're adding each string, converting it to each little byte here into a string itself. And as soon as we append the entire stream into a string, we just close it out and then return it here as string buffer.toString. So now we have the entire string result, which is going to be all of our JSON as a string result. We'll come back up here, and we're going to see that we have the JSON now. And then what we have is our mapper. Now remember when we passed our mapper in up top here in the constructor, we had the production list mapper. This was created in the previous episode. So if you haven't watched that episode, be sure to check it out to see how we created the mapper. Once the mapper is now created and passed in, we can now map it from the JSON. So if we put our mouse over here, we'll see it's going to return us a list of production objects. That's exactly what we want to return from this method here. So get production should return a list of productions. So we're going to say mapper, return a list of productions. if for some reason we got a 500 from the server, we want to return a TechPub API exception, and we're going to put a message out there saying there's an error connecting to the API, status code s info %s again. Now this is string formatting in Java, and it kind of falls back to the basic C string formatting, and S is standing for some type of string literal that we're going to place into here. And so here's the format that we're going to follow. The status code is going to get placed into this first S here, and the response status line dot reason phrase, which is, if we put our mouse over, get an explanation, is actually going to, looks like we're not getting an explanation here. Sometimes that can happen if the Java docs are not lined up according to where Eclipse can find them. So it doesn't look like everything's lined up here for a reason. But what this will do is return back the phrase, the reason, actually the message why it wasn't able to find it. Maybe it will say 404 object not found. Maybe I'll have a server error that was returned from the TechPub server for whatever reason. If that's the case, that will get connected into here. If it's for any other status code here that we don't know how to handle, we're going to go ahead and just throw a default TechPub API exception saying that, hey, I don't know what happened, so we could not connect the API. Here's the status code, and here's the information. This would bubble up to the end user, possibly log it, and show them exactly what the error code that we have, or let them send it to us in a future version. So if we return this back here, go back to the main activity, and now we have new TechPub API, we'll see that we have an error here. So we need to import TechPub API. Let's do that. And we see that we're missing an iProduction list mapper. So in the future we'll be using an inversion of controltainer, but here we'll just do some poor man's dependency injection. We'll say new production list mapper. We're going to import that mapper as well. There we go. So what we need to do now is set the productions, because the error that we're getting down here is because we have an unterminated line here. So the production is going to come from the API.getProductions. So there we go. We see it looks like we have an error here, and this one is surround with a try catch. So sure, let's go ahead and do that now. And we'll just print these things out to the screen here if something happens. And we just had it generate it for us. Eclipse did, so it's just going to print these things to DDMS. I'm going to delete these comments. So now if we run this, what we should see is actually the home screen should launch up. We'll see everything load up here on the home screen. Looks like this. We'll see all the home screen load up. We're not going to have images here, and I'll show you the default image in a second, then we'll go back and get rid of it. And you'll probably see this will probably clock for a little bit in time, and we may encounter an exception. So let's go ahead and fire it up now. See the command, the window down here at the bottom. There's the TechPub. Looks like we ran into an issue here. So it looks like it broke. Let's go ahead and click force close, and then go to DDMS and see what happened. We scroll all the way to the bottom. We're going to see that we have unable to start activity, component info, TechPub player, null pointer exception. So get productions in the TechPub API on line 38. So let's go to line 38 of TechPub API. Here's line 38. Looks like we had a null status code here. One issue that we may have that's probably something that's going to plague us here is, let's check the Android manifest. Looks like we're missing a permission here. So what we need to do is we need to add a permission. Now when we add a permission, there are certain things that you have to have permission for in Android. These things include various different aspects such as internet, camera activity, geolocation. You need to ask the user, hey, is it okay if I use this permission? Now when the user installs this application from the marketplace, they'll be asked on the security screen, this application requests the following permissions: internet, read phone state, camera, GPS, etc. Now our application isn't going to request all those features. We right now just need internet because we need to go up to the the TechPub API and get the JSON from the internet. So what we're going to do is click the new button, and then we're going to say uses permission, and then we're going to scroll down. Now this list is very long, so you can see all the different types here: the call phone, camera, change state, diagnostics, dumps, flashlights, all kinds of stuff. So let's go, there we go, internet, oops, wrong one. Internet, we'll just save it, and now we have the internet permission. And if we start this back up again, it's going to reinstall the application. Let's see what happens now. See if we get an error again. So if you see the screen is turned black here. Now, there we go. Now it just loaded. What's happening in the background is as soon as the activity loaded, we call it out to the internet to say to get the JSON, to download the JSON, parse the JSON, and then load this screen here. So there's quite a few things going on, and it's bridged. The emulator right now is bridging its network connection through my computer, which is connected through Wi-Fi internally in my house, over to TechPub servers wherever they are located in the world. And we have all that network transference back and forth across the wire, and we have the parsing. And so what happened is it looked like the app kind of froze for a second. You weren't really sure what was happening. So what we really need to do is we need to be able to kind of run this thread on a background thread. So if we were to maybe just play with this just a little bit, we could say this. We say thread dot sleep, and let's just set this for, set this for 15,000 seconds. Oh, excuse me, 15,000 milliseconds. So it's going to sleep for 15 seconds. Looks like we're getting an error here. Showing with the right catch, that's fine. And now what I'm just doing here is I'm going to illustrate how and what's going to happen if for some reason your app becomes hung. This is what the end user is going to encounter if you don't run things in a background thread. So I'm going to start the app, it's going to load the API, and it's going to freeze for a few seconds, and right now I'm going to start playing with the app as soon as this loads. Now I'm going to start pressing things, start dragging things around. And see what happens now is we have a sorry activity TechPub and an application TechPub is not responding. This is an ANR error, stands for application not responding error. You'll see this quite a few times in the Android documentation. Now if you just noticed, the application actually continued to run and just loaded in the background. So it slept for 15 seconds and then went and did its work. Now if your application happens to hang for, I think it's anywhere from 4 to 8 seconds, you'll get an ANR response, which is this window here. It gives the user the opportunity to wait for the application to return from what it's doing, or it allows the user to force close the application. Most of the time, the user is going to force close the application, which then in turn closes your application. Users don't want to wait. They want to see an active, responsive application. So we'll hit TechPub here again, and it'll load up. And we can sit here for a second again, and while this is loading, what we can do is we can hit the wait button now, and I'll show you what will happen. So as soon as this comes up, I'm trying to cause some activity on the screen here so Android thinks I'm trying to interact with it. Oops, then we loaded that window up. So it looks like it loaded up here. It didn't give us an ANR for that reason, for some reason. It looks like Android thought it was responding in time. It's kind of hit or miss when it's going to happen, which is kind of one of the reasons that you really need to throw everything in a background thread. So let's go ahead and start learning a little bit about some background threads. Okay, so we're back inside of the main activity now. I'm going to go ahead and delete this thread sleep code here because I don't want it to hang at all. But what I want to do is I want to create a new inner class here. And we'll minimize everything here, and this class is going to be called a get episodes task. Now what this does is it extends asynchronous task. An asynchronous task takes 3 parameters. Let's go ahead and hop over to the documentation to take a look at what these mean. Now we're here on the Android developer documentation site for the async class task. And an asynchronous task, as it states here, allows a easy use of thread management, so we can kind of hop back and forth between the UI thread without having to manually create and dispose of and run threads and runnables. So we really don't have to do a lot of the dirty work. A lot of the dirty work is done inside of this class for us. What this allows us to do is fire off a task and get some feedback as the task is executing on a progress type of cycle. And this class, as we see in the Eclipse here, takes 3 different is a generic class which takes 3 different type parameters. Here I'm putting void, and list of production. So what do each one of these parameters mean? These 3 generic types, the first one is the params, the parameters that we're going to pass into the class itself, if you would like to pass any in. The second is the type of progress that's going to be published. If you're going to be publishing progress, so maybe you need to download a file, maybe to do something different, this is the type of progress it's going to return as things are executing. So inside of an asynchronous task in the background thread, you can actually publish progress, and this is the type. So you may want to publish just integer values saying looks like we're 23% done or 48% done. And then the result, this is the kind of result that's going to return. So this is the first parameter, second parameter, and third parameter. And then what we have here is I have void, void, and list of production. So what the void means is that I don't have any particular type of parameters I'm going to pass in. And void here says I don't really have any particular type of publishing progress that I'm going to do. I'm not going to publish any measurable progress. I'm going to throw up an indeterminate progress dialog shortly, which is going to show the user that we're loading some TechPub documents and TechPub information. And then at the end, I'm going to return a list of productions here. So if we see we have an error here, and it says import async task, which is good. And then we're going to have an error saying add unimplemented methods. We have one required unimplemented method, and that's do in background. So this do in background returns a list of productions and does something in the background. So this method is the method that runs in the background. We cannot touch the UI thread from here at all. We cannot get to it from whatsoever. This runs on a different thread in the background. Going back to the documentation here, we see that we have do in background, we have a method called begin that we can override, and process progress, and end. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and fill out the rest of this method here. Alright, so now I've filled out the rest of the get episodes task. As you've seen, I've overridden four methods here. I have a on pre-execute, do in background, on post execute, and on canceled. And we're going to do a few things in each one of these. On pre-execute runs on the UI thread. So this is where you can do something right before the background thread starts firing off. So this is where you could maybe update a progress menu. You could inform the user of something that's going to happen right before the task takes place. Do in background is the items of execution that take place in the background thread. The on post execute method happens after the execution has taken place of the background thread, and it will return the result of the do in background method. So do in background returns a list of productions. These list of productions are going to be shoved into here, and you can do some execution here. This is run on the UI thread. And then we have on canceled. If the user for some reason cancels the asynchronous tasks, this will be called on the canceled event. Now notice on the pre-execute, which is right before the background task fires off, we're going to do something. We're going to say show dialog. So what we're really doing is we want to remove the loading from happening on the UI thread. We're going to take the loading of the API, push it off into the background thread, and we're going to have the background thread go to the HTTP call to techpub.com, get the JSON, parse it, and then once it has all the production objects, then return it back to us and let us load our UI at that time. But what we want to do is we want to let the user know that something's happening. So we want to show them a dialog. And what I've done is said show dialog, and I said loading dialog here. This is a constant that I've defined at the top of the file here. And the constant is just a integer value of 1. Now what show dialog is, it's a method that's built into the activity class here. And what it does is says I'd like to show a dialog, and then what we'll do is it'll call a method called onCreateDialog, and we'll get to that in a second. And what we'll do is we'll go inside of that method and we'll actually show a loading dialog to the screen. And we'll use this ID to determine which loading dialog we want, because you could show many different types of dialogs in Android. So we're going to use this number 1 loading dialog constant as a way to determine which one we're going to load. Next, inside of the do background, this is where all the work's done. So we're going to do a try catch here, and we're just going to catch all exceptions here. This is something you're not going to want to have in the production application, and we will get to that point in future episodes where we take the exceptions that are returned, and depending upon what exception is returned, we'll give the user a different error message letting them know what they can do. If maybe there's a connection error, they can hit a retry button and it'll retry again. Right now we're going to just print it to the stack trace, which will dump it to DDMS, to Dalvik debug monitoring server, and then we're going to return a null object. We're going to return a null list of productions here. So we're just going to be testing this as we're developing it to kind of see what's going to happen. And then once the API is called, we're going to call API.getProductions. That's going to return a list of productions for us. So we've already set up the API. We're using the API that's created inside this inside of the parents class, because remember, we're inside of and we're in a subclass right now. If we minimize all this down, we see public class main activity. We see that we're still inside of, oops, we can see that we're still inside of the main activity altogether. So here we're the main activity, the get episodes task class, which is just an extension of the async task, is a subclass of the main activity. So we have access to the API class. We say get productions, it's going to return us a list of productions back. And then we'll push them back. On the post execute is what's going to happen exactly after we return those productions. Now that we have those productions, we'll just call the superclass saying, hey, we're done executing, let it do its work, whatever it needs to do. And then we're going to dismiss a dialog. This is another method that's built into the activity. So it will dismiss the dialog that was previously shown with that ID. So if we've shown a dialog and it's running on the screen and its ID is of 1, this is going to say, hey, activity, I want you to dismiss the dialog with the activity with the ID of 1. So if there's one running with the ID of 1, the activity will close it for us. Kind of nice little helper method. If the result doesn't equal null, so if it hasn't been returned as null, we want to set the list adapter. We want it to load up the productions. We want to load up all the productions inside of the screen. So there we go. And that will load up, and then else we're going to notify the user that they might want to retry. Here we haven't done anything, so we have the set list adapter here. It's going to take the productions. Let's go ahead and take the productions equals the result that was passed into us. So this is what came from the background thread and is delivered back to us. We said that the productions are equal to the result, and now when we call the set list adapter, the production adapter up top here, we'll have that accesses the local productions variable. This local productions variable will now be hydrated with the results that came back from the API. So let's take a look at that again. The productions come from the result. This result is the parameter that comes into the post execute. The post execute is called after everything takes place in the background, and the API is what returns the list of productions. So the list of productions gets returned and is thrown into the parameter here. Now, for some reason the user cancels it, we're just going to go ahead and dismiss the dialog, same thing that happened before. Alright, so now what we want to do is let's go ahead and see what happens if we just go ahead and fire this up. Let's go ahead and hit F11. I'm going to view the screen here. See what loads up. So the TechPub logo shows up, and then we're going to see the screen show, and we'll probably see it sit here with nothing happening really. So we're not really sure what's happening. Something might be happening in the background. We may have an error show up. So it looks like it just shown up there. Now, nothing happened that looks visually different. To the end user, the same exact thing happened as the last time. It just kind of hung for a second. The application just stayed there in a black state, and then all of a sudden it just came back and it had data populated into it. And if we scroll down here, we'll see we have all of the current episodes that are shown, master and get, even some of the brand new ones, such as Rails 3, and there's probably the new threading ones that are in here as well, iPhone, etc. These are all the new ones that are all currently listed here, and all the episodes. So what we want to do is we want to let the user know that something's happening, and that takes place if we go into the, let's close down the adapter here. When we say show dialog, that's when we want to say, hey, we want to create a dialog. So let's go ahead and create that dialog now. Okay, so now I've created the onCreate dialog call. Now this is a call that's directly built into each activity. So let's go ahead and import the dialog error here. Then onCreate dialog, what it does is it takes in an ID, and this ID is the ID of the dialog that we want to create. Now a dialog is going to be something the user sees pops up on the screen. Maybe it's going to be a message for them to view, maybe it's going to be a loading dialog, maybe it's going to have them with a custom view where they can type in some data. In this instance, what we're going to do is we're just going to have a little spinner on the screen that's going to show kind of like an animated GIF type of thing that will show them that something's happening in the background, and it'll say loading, please wait, or something like that. So what we want to do is we want to switch on the ID, and just because we can create many different dialogues at any given time, we want to actually start off with a switch statement, and we're going to say if it's the loading dialog, we want to create a particular type of dialog here. Now what I have here is a notification util. Now this class hasn't been created because we need to create it inside of the packages. The reason why I want to create the notification components in a different package is because they require quite a bit of plumbing to set up, and they can take up a lot of space in the class, so I prefer to create them in a different package. So we're going to com, create a new package, com.techpub.messaging is what I prefer to call it, and I'm just call it notification util. Notification util. It's just a regular class. And so this class is going to have one method, and this method is going to return a dialog. And let's go ahead and import this stuff. And it looks like it's going to organize the imports. When I hit Command Shift O or Control Shift O, I want to say com.techpub.player.r, and this is coming from the r.string.loading message. I'm just going to hit that. And it's going to say it can't find a loading message. We'll get to that in 1 second. So in this method here, what it's going to return is an Android dialog. So this is the dialog that's going to show on the screen. This is the base class for all dialogues in Android. But what I'm actually going to be building is a progress dialog. And a progress dialog allows you to show progress either indeterminate, which means you're not sure when it's going to complete, so it kind of shows that little spinning animated GIF, or it could be determinate, and its range can be from 0 to 10,000. So we're going to actually set this to indeterminate, so I'm going to say progress dialog, your new progress dialog, and it takes a context, and you can see here that the get loading dialog takes in an activity. And so what activity does this belong to? What activity does this dialog belong to? And I'm just going to pass in whatever activity I'm working with, so I'm going to use the base activity class. And I'm going to say, hey, you're going to be indeterminate, so I don't know when you're going to complete. You could take half a second, you could take 20 seconds. So we'll set indeterminate to true. And then there's going to be a message that's going to show with that little loader that says next to it. And then we're going to need a little loading message. So let's go inside of the strings here. So we're going to the res directory, values, strings. We'll add another one called loading message. Loading message. And we'll just say loading with 3 little dots there for the ellipse. And then we'll hit save, and now you can see it rebuilt in the background, and we have loading message available. Now it's going to return that dialog. Let's hop right back over to close out the API here. Let's go back over to the main activity. And now there's notification util. Let's go ahead and import that. Notification util. Oops, like I spelled it wrong up here. And then we want to import it. And now we're going to do that. So notification util is going to say get the loading dialog for this activity. So we're going to pass in ourselves, since we are a list activity. List activity extends the activity class. And if we remember, the loading dialog, just a static call into get loading dialog, takes in whatever context that it needs to work with. And a progress dialog needs a context. An activity is an instance of a context. So we're just going to pass in the current activity, saying when I create this dialog, give me a dialog for this activity. Now what that's going to do is it's going to return this dialog here. And so when we call down here in the bottom, show dialog, show the loading dialog, it's going to come up here. It's going to create that loading dialog, and then this dialog is going to show. Now the activity is going to take place of creating it and showing it to the screen. That's the beautiful part. Now down at the bottom, on the post execute, we say dismiss dialog. Hey, when you're done getting your stuff, close the dialog out. So now let's go ahead and run the app. See it close down here. I'll reopen. And there's TechPub. And I'll see a new screen pop up. And it looks like we still have a problem there. So what's the problem? Why are we not getting the dialog showing up? It's a very good question. We never removed the previous code that was up here. So let's go back to the onCreate. Let's get rid of this TechPub API here. Well, we'll need the API, excuse me. But we're going to say get rid of this stuff. And what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the production list mapper as well. But now what we're going to say is get episodes task. new get episodes task. And then what we're going to say is, whoops, had an equal sign here. The task dot execute. Now it's going to take an avoid dot 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 params. So this is a parameter call. This is similar to the params keyword. The dot 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 signifies the same syntax as you would use in the params keyword in C#. So it says these are optional parameters. Since we're not passing in any additional parameters here, I'm just going to leave that empty. And I can hit the colon there, semicolon, and we're ready to go. So what this is going to do is going to create a new get episodes task, because remember this is actually a class that we created below. And then when we call execute, it's going to execute the class, and it's going to run the on pre-execute, the do in background, on post-execute, and if canceled's called, it will call canceled. So let's go ahead and rerun the app now. We should see a difference. It's going to reinstall the application here. We'll see our little splash screen. And there we go. Now we have our loading screen here. So it's loading, loading, loading. Something's happening in the background. The user knows that something's going on. It could take anywhere from a couple of seconds to 10 seconds. And as soon as the data was retrieved, it showed up on the screen. So now we've replaced the production object with the video object. And if we select one of these, such as .NET Open Source, looks like we have a crash here. So let's see what the crash actually is. Go to the DDMS. We can see that we have a null pointer exception. That's on the video list activity. And I'm not going to get into that code, but the reason why that happened is because the production list is only valid in the context of the main activity right now. We have not stored those values, that list of productions. We haven't stored them in global memory. We haven't stored them in a SQLite database. We haven't done anything like that. So by the time I get to the next screen, the main activity has already shut down, and I don't have access to those productions. I can't get to them. So what we're going to do in the future is we'll load these into a SQLite database, kind of like a temporary cache. So each time you start the app up, it'll just be real snappy. If the first time you hit the app, it'll go load all the episodes, and you'll see all the episodes on the screen, and you can play with them. And then later on in the future, if you decide, hey, I want to refresh, get what's the new updates from TechPub, you can hit the menu, hit refresh. It'll download all the new episodes and update the current ones into the current SQLite cache. Since we're not there, we don't have that access to the data in the video list activity. It's going to crash out and give us a null pointer exception, which is what it just did. So let's go ahead and take this a little step further now. Let's go into, we have the loading dialog there. I'm going to back out a little bit, and we see that we have the productions. We still have this little icon here. If we want to get rid of this icon, let's go ahead and go into the layout, main activity. And let's go ahead and clean this main activity up a little bit to make it look a little more spruced up to the new API. Okay, now I went ahead and cleaned up the linear layout here a little bit. Now remember, we wanted to get rid of this image over here because we don't have images anymore from the TechPub API. So we're going to get rid of this image. I'm going to bring the title over to the left. I'm going to bring this description over a little bit more. I'm going to expand the description a little bit, and I'm going to make the title a little bit bigger. So I'm going to kind of make it a little more user-friendly, and it's going to have a bigger space for fingers to press on which episode they want. Let them get a little bit more detail into the episode itself. So I've removed the image view that was previously here, and now I just have the header separator that was there before, and then I have the selection and then the list view here, which was each list, and then I'm going to have each different row here, so the video row is going to be present as well. Okay, so what we have now is we have the category row, which is what we are going to load into the screen. Each one of the emulators that we see here are, each one of the productions that we see here is a category row. And we could probably rename this to video row or whatever you might want to see, but this is more of a production. So we'll go ahead and let's change this to production row. We'll right click on that, go to refactor, rename, production row.xml. And we need to change that inside of the code as well. So we don't have category row, we have production row now. There's production row. And we'll need to copy that here as well. There we go. And now that we have the production row in place, the production row, it's not valid anymore. Reopen production row. And the production row is each one of the productions that you're going to see on the screen here. So now we just have the text view here, which is going to be center vertically aligned. The text is going to be, just right now for test my application, it's going to be bold. I'm going to make the text really big, and I'm going to have a color inside of here that's the same color we had before. And then we're going to have the details line, and that's going to be 2 lines set to a maximum of 2 lines. And we're having an ellipse at the end so we can see some extra stuff. Let's take a look at the layout. So this is kind of what it's going to look like for each row. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit different than what we're used to seeing here. This is kind of smaller. We have some bigger text here and a little more detail. So let's go ahead and run this and see what this looks like. So we'll close down the app here. We'll reload. We'll get some new a new view here to what it's going to look like. So again, it's going to go up to the TechPub API. And in the future, we're going to load into a SQLite database, so it'll be a little bit more resource friendly, and we won't have to do this every single time. So there we go. Now we have the new view into what we're going to look like inside of the real application. So we can scroll down, and it gives us a little bit more of a nice, clean aspect into the UI. We can kind of read a couple sentences about the details, so such as .NET Open Source. This is .NET Open Source channel, and we can see a little bit more. And if we're interested at that point in time, we can delve into that category a little bit further. But it enables us to really zone in with our eyes to see exactly what we're looking for, and just kind of to look directly into that. Okay, so what we've done here is we have now taken the production class and the episode class and removed the dependency upon the other 2 models that we had before, which are the category info and video info. So let's go ahead and delete those now, and we see if anything else is going to break along the way. And if so, we just go ahead and fix those things. So let's take a look, see if we have any problems inside the code. Looks like we don't. We just have a couple of cleanup exceptions to do here. Java IO exceptions never used. I'm just hitting Control-Shift-O, and it's just organizing the imports. We're just deleting a few things here. Video site list activity, we're not using the position yet here because we're not loading that up from the database just yet. We'll be doing that here shortly in the next couple episodes. So here we go. Now, we've now removed those 2 classes completely from our application. We have removed the mock repository. So we see now we have the storage, we have a status package that we're not using yet. We have a player package, models, and our messaging for notifications, our mappers we created last episode. We now have the TechPub API we're using. We're going to use a TechPub API exception in future episodes to show users exceptions and dialogues based upon that exception if something were to happen that we didn't expect from the HTTP communication. And now we have the TechPub API here loading on the screen as you would expect it. So now as the TechPub team creates new episodes and new productions, those productions will now show up on this homepage every time this application is refreshed in its current state. In the next episode, I'm going to introduce you to RoboJuice, the dependency injection framework built for Android applications. I'm going to build in the dependency injection inside of the TechPub application, which will allow us to separate the components that build the TechPub application, which will allow us for complete separation of concerns depending upon different layers of the application. This will allow us to separate the context objects when we need them from the top layer of the UI all the way down to the database layer where we need a context object as well. RoboJuice will handle all these things for us. We'll kind of build out a little bit more of the application, kind of set up some more of the framework, and then in the episode after that we'll get into actually loading the TechPub API into a SQLite database so we can save it. So each time the application is loaded, it will then read from the SQLite database if it exists. Otherwise, it will try to go to the TechPub API.